You're watching BATV, bringing Brookline home.
Hello, I'm Karma Kitai, and I'm your host for Alivelihood, New Adventures as We Age. Today I'm going to introduce you to Grace Stevens, and Grace is going to tell us about a very big personal transition that she has gone through in the past couple of years. So let's welcome Grace.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to come today, Karma.
Oh, wow. I think it's very special for me to have you.
Thank you.
So I'm remembering that you and I met at an improvisation workshop with Diana Giardella.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think you and I did a little skit together. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit heavy, maybe. And then at the end, I remember I went to give you a hug, and you handed me your hand. I think you apologized to me later, and you said, I'm just learning these new social skills. So why don't you talk about what that's about for you?
Sure. Well, as you know, and to your audience, as I'm transgender, and up until about 2 years ago, I was a guy. And it was a very long and hard decision that I had kept hidden for well over 50 years on trying to figure out what the gender issues that I was dealing with were about. And I finally had come to the point that this was not a choice for me. This was something that I had to do in my life and transition. So I became the person that I truly am. And with all of those years, well over 50, close to 60 years of living as a guy, socialization skills of being a woman are all new to me.
Well, you've gotten to be a good hugger now.
Hugging first, right.
Yeah. So when you and I met a few years ago, I think you were just going through some of the physical procedures, surgical procedures, right?
Right. So again, for people like me, whether or not people have surgical procedures or not is just a level of detail of really trying to understand who they are authentically in their own body, in their own sense of being. There are many people who are transgender, who are transsexual, who will not have any surgery. But for me, the choices were that was going to be part of who I was and what I needed to do for me. But it's just, my journey is my journey, and each of the people in the community take their own journey.
Yeah. And you're now very involved in the community, the trans community, right?
I've become one of the leaders within both the Tiffany Club of New England and at our conference first event, which is held every January here. And I've also, part of my reinvention is not only about my gender, but what I do about it. So I've created a business that goes into corporations and schools and governments where I can train people about gender variance, about the whole spectrum of gender variance.
So do you want to say something about the spectrum?
Sure.
Who's in the spectrum?
Yeah, that, gender is really a spectrum and a continuity. So most people believe that gender is binary. You're male or you're female. And the truth of the matter is it's not binary. I like to tell people it's not even digital. It's an analog across a spectrum. And who I am today may be different than who I was yesterday or who I'll be tomorrow. And gender can be very fluid. And further, people get confused in that a person's gender and a person's gender identity has to be aligned with their sexual orientation, their sexual behaviors, their gender expression. And each of these constructs are really independent and also non-binary. And it becomes very challenging to go into groups and try to explain that, because we've learned culturally that these are aligned. It's been over the last 20, 25 years that we certainly have a better understanding on sexual orientation through the gay lesbian community, that it may not be aligned to your genetic, biological, your chromosomes of what your orientation is. And right now, just trying to teach people that gender identity is similar. It may not be as prevalent as sexual orientation being non-aligned, but it is still there. And that for many people like me, it's very difficult for us to get to a level of self-acceptance that this is who I am and this is what I'm like, when the culture says, no, you can't be that. And the forces of shame that come upon us get in the way of expressing who we truly are.
Yeah. So, Grace, what would you say were some of the first indications you remember having as a young person that there were some gender issues?
Wow, that goes way back. It really is challenging to think about the detail of how did I know when I was different when it just seemed I knew that I was different. And I had a friend once that I asked that same question to, that I interviewed someone one day. And I asked that question, and the response was, gee, I didn't know that all boys didn't look in the window and say, what a pretty skirt, I want that. And I realized that, wow, I think I felt the same way. But I didn't know that it was different. It just know that was how the way I felt.
Do you remember expressing some of those wishes when you were a youngster?
It was very scary to express. I remember when no one was home and my mother was out wearing her clothes and being in panic if I ever heard a key in the door. So I know through my teenage years, even younger, probably by the time I was 9 or 10, I would be trying on her clothes when she was not there. And it just felt like this urge to do this was always there.
From your earliest memories, you think, huh?
I consciously have been saying I've known this since I was 8, and I've recently done some personal work that has found 4-year-old parts that knew they weren't a boy. So I'll probably do some further work to explore that, but it's really, at the level of comfort today, I feel totally aligned in who I am.
Right. So aside from coveting women's clothing, were there other ways that you sort of expressed your femininity?
I think the answer to that is no. That was so scary to be labeled queer, to be labeled effeminate. I would be fighting that. I remember when I was maybe 8, I think I was about 8 or 9, and I was taking accordion lessons. And I had an accordion teacher would say, "You're such a girl." And I would scream and yell and tell my parents, "I do not want to have these lessons with this person." And I don't know whether
what did that person mean by that, did they?
I don't know. I really don't know. I just know I was so triggered and so scared, and that they were seeing something in me that I didn't want to be seen by anyone.
Yeah. So there was a way in which you recognized that it wasn't good. There was something wrong for you to be feeling that way, right?
Right. I think so. What's also interesting is for many transsexuals, transgender people, one of the behaviors that they will do is they will take on levels of hypermasculine behavior.
Yeah.
And I remember probably when I was in my teens, my early teens, I became sort of a bully. And I became pretty
Physically?
aggressive. I had puberty early, so while I was bigger than other kids, yes. And then when they outgrew me, I realized that wasn't going to work. But, and then I probably moved the bully from a physical to a more cognitive, and be able to talk, be able to think, and be able to lead and do that in a very aggressive manner. So that was also protecting, don't get very close to me because I don't want to let you find out what's really inside of me. But I would like to lead, but I'm not going to be able to create any kind of relationship with you because I can't let you that close.
Right. So would you say that you didn't have close friends growing up?
That's a fair statement. I didn't have friends. I didn't, it was very tough because I was so busy in my head, there's something wrong. I feel female, but my orientation was I was attracted to females. So in the 50s and the 60s, there was no information on what I could do with this, or how do I fit in, where do I fit in.
So it must have been very painful for you for a long, long time, huh?
I think that I tell people today my drug of choice was TV. I would sit in front of the TV, I would watch TV, I would numb out by watching TV. So there was plenty of ways to alleviate the pain that was there. But in hindsight, knowing what I do now, it was very painful.
So you did choose a male, stereotypically male profession to go into. And so you must have been good in math and science, right? In
Right.
high school and all.
Right. I think ever since I was young, I had an uncle who was an engineer, and by third grade, in the mid-50s, satellites were being launched, Sputnik, Explorer, and I was already a geek, a nerd in those days, and knew that I wanted to be an engineer. So I was good in math and science. It was something where you dealt with numbers, you dealt with facts, you didn't deal with people. And
Or
it
with
was kind of
feelings.
natural. I would deal with feelings. And it was very natural for me to go into that. And I've spent over 4 decades in the engineering field. And then one of my other reinventions is in 2004, I went back to school to get a degree, a master's degree in counseling. And I've gone from...
Kind of the opposite of engineering.
I don't know if they can get more opposite. What I learned, I have degrees now, they're 40 years apart. I have a bachelor's in engineering and a master's in counseling psych. And what I've learned is that I could talk to people. What I've learned is I can write. And I've learned a lot about myself. I went back to school before I transitioned, and still wasn't clear around what my journey would be and what my path was be. And in my 3rd year in school, I wrestled with signing up for a class called Counseling GLBT. And when I signed up for it, I knew that I would come out in that class. And I had a fair amount of anxiety of going in. And then the first day of the class, we all had to explain why we chose to go to this class. And I, not so calmly, said, I introduced myself and I said, I've been wrestling with gender issues all my life. And nobody questioned me. And then I did a presentation for the project on what was called Under the Transgender Umbrella, Male to Female Transsexuals. And when I started the presentation, I had a cartoon of the elephant in the room. And I announced, I'm the elephant in the room, I'm transgender. And the room got very quiet. There were 15 students there with me. And the 15-minute presentation turned into a 45-minute presentation. And I found 4 female classmates that would start going out with Grace and be my first socialization out in the world.
Oh.
And help me, move me along on my journey.
So by that time, were you living as a woman?
No, up until that time, I would be closeted in my apartment, and I would get dressed but never go out. So for well over 50 years, I would wear clothes at home, big closet, but never be brave enough to go out. And after I did the presentation, I had to find community. And that's when I had to force myself to find the local community at Tiffany Club of New England. And it was very scary for me to call them. It was very scary for me to go there.
So you knew about them from the internet?
I knew about them for years at the internet. I'd be like many people that I call, I was a stalker. I would look at it, I would say, I would be lurking on the internet, looking at people, looking at, how do they do this? How can they be? One of the themes of Tiffany Club is you are not alone. So for many transgender people, we think we're the only people that struggle with this. And the answer, the truth is, we're not. There are many people that have some sort of issue around their gender identity. We kind of know statistically in the US, it's about 1/4% of the adult male population does transition. And I've seen studies coming out of the UK that they would not be surprised if people with gender identity issues can range from 1% to 5% of the population. And I think that may be high at 5%, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's 1%. Yeah.
So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that over the years, you did get married as a man.
Right.
And had 3 children.
I did. And was a great father, and I'm still a great father. So I've been very lucky in that I've lost no one in my family. Now
That is remarkable.
Thank
is
you.
that different from other
I
trans
think for
people
many
that you know?
people, for many people in the community, that relatives, and it seems to be the closer you are, the more challenge there is in accepting somebody's authentic self when it crosses a gender line. And people certainly lose marriages, and that's highly likely, but children oftentimes will abandon parents. And that I find very difficult and very challenging. For me, the biggest decision that I had to make on my transition was, what if my kids choose to abandon me? And I came to the point, because they were all adults at the time, that if they abandoned me, that would be their journey. I would hope that they would have enough compassion to understand how difficult my journey has been in hiding my true self. And each of them found a different period of time to reach acceptance, but they all have reached acceptance. And my ex-wife believes that family is family is family, and you don't abandon family.
Huh. Right. So she's supportive as well, huh?
We have great holidays together with family and with my two sons who are married, extended family, the in-laws on all sides. And I feel so blessed to be in that situation.
And you have a granddaughter,
I
right?
have a granddaughter. Yeah,
She's the first one.
she is the first one.
Yeah.
And to go play with her, and it's always been a challenge. What is she going to call me? So right now she calls me Grace.
And I asked you that about your children. Yeah, you said that your youngest wants to call you Dad, huh?
Yeah. So two of my children, my two older children, call me Grace, and my youngest calls me Dad, still calls me Dad. And he said that, I've known you for 25 years of Dad. Come back in another 25 years, and perhaps I'll be able to call you Grace. And this is, for me, not worth fighting about. The fact that the family is still together, and we love each other, and we care about each other. That's what's important.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want us to talk in the last few minutes here about what you're doing in terms of new work.
Sure.
And what you're hoping for. So why don't you let us know about that?
So this past year has been a year of reinvention for me, continuing. I've created two businesses. I've created the Gender Variance Education and Training, where I go into corporations and schools and do training. I'm also in process of creating a group therapy practice that I'm calling Transportive Relationships Counseling, where I'm looking to create groups for people who are in positive relationships with transgender people, so they can come together and talk about just normal relationship struggles that they may be having with the people that they're in relationship with, without having to explain to others that they're trans, that their relationships are trans, and just deal with what we all deal with there. So I'm hoping to get that started and seeing if there are people be interested to do that. I'm also hoping to do more speaking, and speaking about being authentic in your life, that it's taken me so long to reach this level of authenticity in my life. And for me, the issue was gender, but how many of us are really struggling with not being the person they know they are inside? And I think this crosses everyone on, you know, how to do that, and what holds you back from being in your truth and living your truth.
Right. So you'd like to launch a public speaking
I
business.
would like to be able to become a speaker about living your authentic life. My youngest son, a few months after I told him, called me up and said he wasn't happy being and doing what he was doing. He was teaching in Tucson. He was married. He had bought a house and felt locked down. He was 26 years old. And he said, Dad, I don't want to be your age. I don't want to be in my 60s and realize I've gone down the wrong path in life. And he said he was teaching. There were a number of men in their 50s, volunteers in schools, that each one told him that they got married early and they never really did what they wanted to do in their life. And it struck me that many of us go out, we lock down our lives in our early 20s, and we haven't addressed our own authenticity. So I'd like to go and talk and ask people and tell them it's okay.
Yeah. And you're learning how to be a motivational speaker, I guess.
I am. Yeah, I've been going to some classes at the National Speakers Association, and over the past year, I've done a number of speaking events. I've been into schools, I've been into corporations, I've been teaching fellow therapists about the gender world. And I'm getting more and more comfortable being up in front, talking and responding to questions, and being very open on my journey and my path. And hopefully that it will be motivational, be inspiring for people.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that you'd like to be writing a book, right?
I am planning on writing a book that's going to talk about parts of my journey, and at least as a subtitle, it'll be musing on my many transitions. So this is just one. The gender is just one of my transitions. Going from engineering to counseling to speaking, each of these is a transition. And it seems like now at this age, my reinventions are accelerating. There's more and more every day. And I think that might be inspirational for people also.
Yeah. And in your previous lives, did you have the opportunity to write about personal things?
I was so scared and so much hiding that I would not let anything out. I would not touch anything. Don't get to know me. Don't get too close. And now I'm much more of an open book. What would you like to know? Because I'm at peace with myself. The day that I came back from transition from facial surgery, all the chattering in my head stopped. The chattering that said, you're not being true, you're not being real, you're not being authentic. And I came back and I was recovering. It was very noisy. It just quieted down. And that let me know that was the right thing to do.
Well, I think that's a beautiful story, Grace.
Thank you.
And as you say, I think there are so many people who don't live the life that they really could be living, right? And as you say, it might have nothing at all to do with gender.
Most of the time it doesn't.
Yeah. Or even sexual identity.
Right.
But, as you say about your son, that maybe he felt for a while that he had made some wrong decisions about.
Right. He wants to be outdoors. He wants to be having adventures. He doesn't want to be locked up inside. He's a great teacher, but that's not enough for him. He wants to be in the outdoors, living, breathing, exercising. Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story here. And I'm sure it's going to be meaningful for people to look at you and listen to you and recognize that you're a beautiful woman who
Thank you so much.
who is very comfortable with herself now.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so join us next time when I will have two partners in an online publishing business to speak to here on Alivelihood.